Hey, good morning. Good to see you online. Good to have you with us. Overflow Coffee Shop up top. We see y'all. Hope you're ready for a great service today. I'm feeling amped and ready to roll. I hope y'all are too. Listen, before we get into the message today, I've been talking about this for a couple of weeks. On September 10th, is our kickoff Sunday. That is the way we kind of kick off the fall here at Cornerstone. So if church is not your thing or you haven't been in church in a long time, on kickoff Sunday, we do things a little bit different. As a matter of fact, we're going to encourage you on kickoff Sunday to wear your favorite team colors, jersey, whatever. If you're an Alabama fan, it's a good time to wear, or an Auburn fan, it's a good time to wear. It's a new year for y'all, right? Like we can relate to this. As a Denver Broncos fan, I'm gonna be rocking my jersey. So it's a great, if you're like into, I don't know, like competitive surfing and you got a person and you want to come in, like whatever, like this is your time to represent. But on kickoff Sunday, I am going to do something that I believe will be very powerful in terms of a series for our church, and I need your help to pull it off. As we live in Etowah County, there is one church for every 400 people, but 7 out of 10 people in Etowah County don't go to church anywhere. So on September 10th, we're kicking off a series called Church Sucks, but it doesn't have to. And we believe God's going to use this to reach people. And now here's where I need your help. In our lobby, you're gonna find that there's a table set up and there's a bunch of like tiles and things set on it. For those of you, and there's a lot of you here in our church, a lot of this comes from conversations that I've had with so many people in our church that have gone through church hurt, that have experienced something. Maybe it was the way they grew up. Maybe church was not something that was applicable to you. Maybe it was something like you just went a couple of times. Maybe you only went to church with your grandparents. Maybe you were in a church and something really terrible happened. You had a really bad memory or whatever. I would love for you to just write on these tiles, whatever those things are. There's different sizes. Some of you got like larger stories to share. But one thing I would encourage you to do is keep it anonymous, obviously. Don't call out like church names or whatever. But we're going to use these, and you'll be helping me out in terms of this series. I think it's going to be just special. So that's on September the 10th. So mark it down. If you have a friend that does not go to church, family member that does not go to church, this is an incredible opportunity to be able to invite them and maybe, who knows, change the way they think about church. Hey, today we're closing a series called This Is What We Do, and I'd just like to put it out there right now. If you're a guest with us, thank you so much for being here today. We're talking about money, all right? But it's gonna be in a way maybe you hadn't heard a pastor or church talk about before, because we're really coming at it from a different angle. We're coming at it with this idea of like, this is what we do. As a church at Cornerstone, we talk about generosity a lot because it's one of our values. And generosity is more about a lifestyle than it is just your finances. It's about who you are and what you do. A few years ago, I guess, golly, Cornerstone will turn 9 years old in 2024. Our church was just a couple of years old, but we needed to make some major renovations within our church. And there was just no way that we could afford to take out a loan or anything. Our church was about half the size we are now. We were just in one service, and we needed to raise $100,000 over our regular giving. We needed people to give over the top so that we could do some of the things that we needed to do in this building. For those of you who don't know, this is an old Presbyterian building, and for those of you who have been in Gadsden, this is like First Pres, and we have nothing to do with that church. That church has been gone, but this building, this site, one of the things I think this is really cool is that this auditorium, this shell, has been here since the 1900s, which is really cool. Our kids' wing was built in the 20s, and so there's some cool things about that. What you see on the exterior is from the 70s. So all that to say, there was a lot that needed to happen. There was a lot of upgrades that needed to take place, and we couldn't do it. And so I challenged our church to give over the top. And I said that my wife and I, Erin and I, that year, we were going to double what we gave. At that point in time, we were giving about 15% of our income to the church. And we said, we're going to double it to 30%. We're going to give for 1 year, we're going to give 30%. And I went home and I told my wife, I said, listen, I don't know how we're going to do that. I just believe that this is the right step for us, and I think we've got to set the example. As a pastor, as a leader, we've got to set the example, and I want you to know that year our church did it. We raised over $100,000. So what you see today are things that you take for granted, such as our parking lot. Y'all, I'm telling you, that thing used to be horrible. It could drizzle, and it's we would have boats. We'd send them out like you were in Venice, you know what I mean? It was kind of a selling point. You could be in Venice right here in downtown Gadsden. We'd pull up in a boat and we'll take you in, sir, right? And it was that's kind of how we grew the church. And then our bathrooms, the restrooms, the event restrooms, those have all been updated. Our lobby and kids wing, and we did so much online. If you're watching, a lot of this happened from when we raised an additional $100,000. And man, God was just so good to us. But I did something that year as well. I said, Aaron, as we take this step, I just want to track. I want to just see if what God does. And so I just kept a note of anything abnormal that would happen to us financially that year, things that I'm not talking about regular stuff, just abnormal things. And that year, the year that we doubled, that was the year that God gave us everything back and then some. All the money that we gave to the church, God in some way gave it right back to us. And so needless to say, I'm very passionate about living what we would call an abundance lifestyle. And when you experience abundance, you don't want to go back. This is the kind of the graphic we've been using for this entire series, this idea of scarcity versus abundance. And scarcity is where most Americans live just in general, because we get money, so we consume, but because we're consuming more than what we're bringing in, we end up not having enough, and then we're constantly fearful for what's going to happen next. What happens if, hey, they do make the layoffs? What happens if I don't get the overtime? What happens when we get that extra bill? What happens when there's a lot of this stuff, which is why 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. But then abundance is totally different, and it starts totally different because it's giving, and you're like, but that makes no sense. I can't afford to give. But you give, and then as you give, God multiplies that, and then your faith grows. And I'm just letting you know, as someone who's experienced this firsthand, and so many of you have as well, when you experience God's abundance, his economy doesn't work the way the American economy works. And I'm telling you, it's so much better, and there's so much freedom in it. So we're going to look at 3 quick thoughts this morning on how to live an abundant life. And there are 3 ways you can do that, all right? The first one is this. You can give in the moment. People that want to experience abundance, you can just give in the moment. Have you ever been in those moments where it was like, I have an opportunity to meet someone's needs right here, right now? Right? You're like, hey, here's an opportunity. It just happened. You weren't looking for it. You were just there. Maybe you're at the grocery store, and it was like, here's a person. They're struggling. They obviously, they don't have enough to pay for their food or whatever. They're thinking about what to put back, and you're like, I have an opportunity to meet a need. You see someone, and it's like, hey, they need some school supplies, right? This just happened. Schools a couple weeks ago, and you're like, hey, I can help meet that need. It's just in the moment. These are those one-off occasions. God stirs in your heart, I need to do something for this person. And so you meet the need. You just give in the moment. And I love the story of the Good Samaritan. I think this is a great picture Jesus shares about this made-up story in regards to a guy who was just minding his own business, who got beat up and left for dead. And then it says really that when you kind of read it, it was like a priest, right? And a pastor. It was like 2 different religious people walked by this guy who was beat up on the road, left for dead, and was like, man, that's rough, right? And they left the guy right there, right? They just left the guy right there. It's like knowing there's a toddler walking on 459 and you can't, no, was that, no. You see, it's a made-up story, y'all. That's all I'm saying, all right? Jesus, I'm talking about Jesus. He had a made-up story. It's called a parable. So then Jesus brings up the Good Samaritan, right? And Jesus uses the most extreme version of a Jewish context because Samaritans were looked at as half-breeds. They weren't good enough. So he uses the Good Samaritan to immediately meet the needs of this man who was literally dying and was beat up. And I love what this verse, how Jesus says it in Luke 10. He says, going over to him, the Samaritan, it soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine, and he bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey, and he took him to an inn where he took care of him. It says, then the next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, and we know, like when you study that out, that the amount of money he gave him was 2 days worth of wages. So imagine, like, however much money you earn in one day, he gave him 2 days worth of money and says, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. He drops basically like an unlimited credit card on this guy and says, listen, if he just really is blowing up the room service, he doesn't say cut him out after like the 3rd time he orders shrimp scampi. He says, hey, if he runs the bill higher, I'm going to be back in a couple of days, and I will personally pay whatever this guy has done. I think that's just an incredible picture of generosity and giving in the moment. Here's a guy, he wasn't looking to like find someone to come rescue. The Good Samaritan is a terminology that we use today because it's just a random person who came across an opportunity to do something good. And this guy doesn't just do something good, he goes over the top. He goes over the top. Last week, I literally get a phone call, and a person says, Pastor, I have to share this story with you. And after they tell me the story, I'm like, hey, I have to share the story. Can I share your story? They said, absolutely. This person had a medical procedure that is coming up, and insurance wasn't going to cover the cost of this procedure. And so they knew they had to plan and save for this thing. And if you can imagine, if you've been in these situations, this stuff is very expensive, out of pocket to pay for it. And so they had been saving their money to be able to do this thing that they needed to have done. And they receive a phone call from the hospital talking about, hey, what was coming up and going over the different expenses. And then they dropped something on them they weren't expecting. They said, hey, there's a $2,600 charge that you're going to have to pay before you go, and that's in addition to the other expenses you have to pay. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever received a phone call like, you need to pay $2,600 right now, you're like, oh yeah, sure, let me go throw up real quick, right? And I'll call you right back, right? Like, how many of us are like, yeah, I got $26, here you go. $2,600, and the person's telling me on the phone, like, hey, I'm not going to lie, like, I freaked out. Like, how do we have to do that? And so we give them our credit card and we pay for it because this is something they needed to do. It was something they couldn't afford to do, but it's something they had to do. And so they put it on a credit card and said, okay. And the next day it was like, wow, like this is tough. And you're thinking through all this and went into a restaurant to go order some lunch. And there was a person working at the counter and they remembered them from the block party we just had this last month. A lot of you know we shut down Meringue Park and we had a huge block party there, and this person met this person at our block party. They showed up to our block party. And it was like in that moment, when she saw the eyes of this person, in her heart felt God telling her, you have $100 in your purse. Give it to her. Now, you just dropped $2,600. What is your thing? Like, nah, God, no. Are you sure? Like, my prayer life is not that good. I don't think I heard God clearly. Right? Did you just $10? Did you mean $10? And she said she's having this conversation with herself, getting ready and closer. And then as she gets to the counter, the girl recognized her because they had conversation. And the girl tells her, hey, I remember you. And she says, listen, every day I get to eat a free meal every day. She's like, and I am just tired I'm not going to have it today. She's like, I want you to have my free meal. So here's this person who's wondering, do I give this person this money or not? Now that person tells her, your meal's on me. She took that as her sign to go, okay, I need to obey God, even though I know we can't afford it, and tells this person, listen, you can't rob me of this blessing. I want you to have it. I want you to know I love you. God bless you. Give this person $100. Now, that's a great story just in and of itself, except the story doesn't stop there. She said the very next day, she gets a phone call and got a call in regards to medication in terms of follow-up from the surgery. Well, that medication was supposed to cost $4,500 and said, hey, your insurance is gonna cover part of it. You only need to pay $1,900. You know what the difference was? For those of you who do math, well, lucky for you, I'm Asian and I can do math. $2,600 was the difference. $2,600. And as soon she got that phone call, she said she just started crying because she realized that the money that she didn't think she could give, she had it the whole time. But she felt like she had to obey God first before this other thing would have happened, which means your heart matters. Your motives matter. Why you give matters, right? And your faith is gonna grow. If you give money thinking like, God's gonna give this back to me, and your intention and your motive and your heart is wrong, you're gonna be later going like, this is a bunch of lie, this is crock, this is garbage, because your heart was not in the right place. Here was a person, heart was in the right place, and I can promise you their faith grew from that. It was just really amazing. So you just kind of give in the moment. Here's the second way to live an abundant life. You give with a plan, right? Some of us are like, I have a plan, it's a good plan, and when I have the plan, you will know the plan, right? That is the plan. Anyone? All right, no, are we with you guys with me today? We're gonna have fun this morning? All right. Generosity happens when you have a plan. And we've talked about this concept of tithing, which is 10% of your income, which seems crazy, but if you're gonna do that, you better have a plan, right? For people that are like, I'm gonna give 10% of what we make, you better have a plan when it comes to your finances. You put God first. I love how the prophet Isaiah wrote it. He says, the generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity. I love that. He's like, because generous people, they plan to do it. And then it's like, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. They know what they want to do, when they want to do it. They have a plan. Now, there are literally people who go, hey, this is what we want to give. And when you actually tithe, that's a plan. You're saying, I am putting God first in all areas of my life. And if you want to experience all of God's blessings for you, and there are some things that are clear in Scripture, one of them comes down to finances. And if God doesn't have that area of your life, you withhold this part from Him, you can't expect to receive all that God has to give to you. And this is where lots of pastors and churches get in trouble, because this is where they kind of make it very much prosperity gospel. That if you give, then you get, and you get more. That's not true. It doesn't always happen like that. But at the same time, you get to experience abundance, which is what only happens when you give. So it's a crazy boundary, but it's not about giving to get, because that would make your heart with an impure motive. But as you give, you live in this world of abundance. It's totally different where your faith starts to grow. So you have to be strategic. Some of you, I get it. Financially, in terms of bills and what you have, like, we got to help you get on the right track when it comes to your finances. And so be strategic with that. Maybe you say, our goal is to get to 10%, but maybe we can start at 3%, right? Hey, don't beat yourself up on that. Like, it's not about like this dogmatic religious, you have to hit this number and then you receive God's blessings. It's about your heart. And so just saying, all right, Lord, like, I want to be able to do this. I want to get better. So let's just start. Where can we start? What is that for you? What does that mean to you? Maybe you say, hey, we can do this much right now, and we're going to continue to grow it. As God grows our faith, we want to do that as well. I got a message. I'm telling you, you talk about this stuff, and then people experience it. And so I want to share with you, because I've shared a lot of personal stories about me, but I had a person send me a message this last week and say, hey, Pastor, I'm really trying to dive into living abundantly like you're talking about. And so we did that, and then our spouse got a raise. I'm taken aback. I'm moved. It's a good feeling. This is just one person's story that took this step. All right, like, hey, you're talking about abundance, Pastor. I want to experience that. And they did that, and then, boom, that's just happened in their life. I'm not saying, hey, guys, listen, if you increase your giving today, I'm just letting you know, someone in here is getting a raise, all right? Someone in here is getting, I'm not saying that. I'm just sharing with you what happens, and God works in different ways in the heart of people when you just trust him. He knows what he needs to do with people. You give with a plan, that is abundance. Here's the third way. If you want to live an abundant life, give over the top. All right, so you're talking about just in those moments, you're talking about giving with a plan, right? Being intentional. And then there's this idea of giving over the top. Jesus actually shares with us what this kind of looks like in Mark 12. And I love what he says here. And you will know, if you grew up in church, you've probably heard this story before, but it says in verse 41, Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple, and he watched as the crowds dropped in their money. What if I did that like Sunday, like we do offering at the end? I just sat over there in the corner and was like watching you, you know? It's like just sat there like, oh, interesting. All right. Oh no, I'm taking them out to lunch today. Right? You know what I mean? Like, could you imagine? Like, that's what Jesus is literally sitting in the temple watching people as he gives. And I love that because he's so perspective. Like, he's just like, he's able to have insight that we can't. And that comes from being truly like God himself, right? And he says, many rich people put in large amounts of money, which you can imagine if you're sitting there and you're watching that, because it's just right there in the open. People had to be like, oh, wow, look at that guy. Oh, man, look at what they just did. And then it says, then a poor widow came in and dropped in 2 small coins, depending on translation, 2 copper mites, right? The widow's mites. And she just throws in basically the equivalent of even less than a penny. So just imagine them throwing in 2 pennies. Then Jesus called his disciples to him and said, hey, he gathered around and says, hey, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all of the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. She gave everything she had to live on. Her trust and obedience to God was more important than trying to take care of her own needs. And Jesus says, I see her heart and I see the purity here and I know what she has and I know what she doesn't have. Bam, she gives all of it. When's the last time you ever gave till it hurt? I'm talking when you gave and you felt it in your wallet. You felt it in your checking account. You're like, oh, man, I think we overdid it there, right? I believe that when you have those kind of moments, God will use that to bless someone. I'm not saying necessarily you. I'm saying I believe God uses that to bless someone because he never allows a blessing to go unused. And when you bless other people, when you go over the top, you're inviting God to do something in your life that few people experience. These past 8 years for our church, God has blessed us. I mean, in incredible ways. If you're here at Cornerstone any length of time, you'll know I don't like to do a lot of fundraisers. We don't try to do fundraisers. We're not always trying to go hey guys, we need to do a fundraiser to buy new air filters or whatever. We try not to do that. The one thing that we do every year, we do our Easter 120, which is our Easter outreach, and then we'll do something in terms of a Christmas offering, something specific. But outside of that, we don't do fundraisers. Just not something. We just don't do it. But our church has always been a church that gives over the top, and I had our admin run these numbers for me. I said, hey, I was just curious. I was spending time with a pastor friend in Huntsville a couple weeks ago, and we were just talking, and they talked about how much their church had saved, and I was like, man, how did you do that? That's wild. I wish we could have done that, And so I just talked to our admin and said, hey, can you run some numbers for me? Can you see anything extra, all this extra stuff, things that are not in our budget, whatever, can you just tell me, how much have we done? What is it? I'm curious to know for 8 years as a church what we have done. And I'm telling you, since 2015, Cornerstone has given $720,000 over the top of regular giving. You're like, dang, Pastor, where'd all that money go? I've been on some nice vacations. No, I'm kidding. I always have to do that one time. My elders hate when I do that. I'm just kidding. let me tell you what we've done. Things that you can't see. We have replaced our roofs. Roofs? How do you say it in the South? Oh man, I noticed I sound very not Southern there. We have replaced the roofs. Is it plural roofs? Help me. We're probably not using the service now, right? You know what I'm saying? Roofs. We've replaced the roof on each of these buildings. Like we've replaced them. Boom. We were just able to pay for that, right? We have actually built water wells in countries like Africa. We have raised money and we have literally provided for tens of thousands of pairs of shoes in the country of Indonesia where the gospel has never been heard of. We have made constant improvements to our church. Our mortgage, Cornerstone, when we started, we assumed the debt of another church, and it was $430,000 that we didn't have. So here we are 8 years later, we are right around $80,000 left on that mortgage. How amazing is that? We've just done that over the top. So here's what I'm sharing with you. We, as a church, have a monumental task ahead of us. Because as God continues to grow, and this year has been very special in those regards, we really only have, as a church, 3 options, all right? The first option and the most logical option, the most probably difficult option is we're gonna have to add a third service. I'm not saying next week, all right, no one freak out, but that's in our future, probably within a year, we're gonna have to add a third service. Why? Because we're gonna continue. As God keeps bringing people, as people who are finding place to connect, we're gonna continue to make room for those who need to connect. And as God keeps sending people, we're gonna make room. So that's option number 1, is to add a third service. Option number 2, build a parking garage, and we will name it after you, all right? Like if you give the money for a parking garage, it's gonna have your, it doesn't have to, but we'll definitely give you like a cement plaque or something, right? You give us, like we'll have to build a parking garage because that's why we have to go to a third service, because there's not enough parking. We are decimating parking all over downtown Gadsden, which I think is honestly incredible. Or the third option is to move. Well, guess what? We don't have the money for any of that. I'm just letting you know what the options are. And I'm telling you as the pastor, I don't know what the answer is. We didn't anticipate that. We didn't know, this is what's happening. This is what God is doing. And so all we can tell you is, here's what I can promise you. That the elders and myself, we will continue to lead our church with financial integrity, and we will trust and follow God to take the right and necessary steps as we need to, not leaning into debt unnecessarily and not just doing things because we feel like this is what we're supposed to. We want to make sure we are trusting God in all areas. Aaron and myself personally will continue to steward our own personal finances in a God-honoring way that shows we will continue to trust God as God continues to grow our church. And then thirdly, we're going to continue to be a generous church. Why? Because this is what we do. This is what we do. We continue to reach people we could go on and on and on and on and on about what we've done here. I just think of the little building over here, Mercy Depot, where 5 days a week they're feeding lunch. And you know what's amazing about that ministry? It's 100% volunteer led. It just started out as 1 day a week, opening up a place for those that were homeless or had no options, just to get out of the sun, to have some tea and crackers. It's now turned into a full-blown feeding ministry where other churches partner with us. People are constantly calling, going, how can I help? How can I be a part of? God continues to bless, so we're going to just keep taking those steps to do what we need to do. I think it was 2 years ago for Christmas, we wiped out, I think it was $1 million worth of medical debt in Etowah County and several surrounding counties, and we just wiped out medical debt for people. We're going to continue to be a church that is generous, and I believe that is why our church continues to live in abundance. God continues to bless us. We're fiscally smart. We're not doing crazy things, and God continues to bless us over and over and over again. So I only do this once a year, and this will be the last time I will do this for this year and for a while. We do this thing called a 90-day giving challenge. I want you to experience what life of abundance is like. So if you're here and this Cornerstone's your home, I'm not talking to people that, you're just a guest with us, like, hey, we're actually going to give you a gift today, all right? We want to send you home with something, and I would encourage you, come back. But if you're here and you're saying, like, I want to experience, Pastor, what you're talking about, like, I hear those stories, like, I want that to be my story. I want to challenge you in one of 5 ways. If you're here, you don't give anything, just give something. Just give something. Like, hey, for 90 days, you just say, you know what? I'm just going to give something. This is what we can do. Maybe you give a percentage, like that's a dollar amount or whatever. You're like, that's a percentage of your income. Maybe you say, hey, I'm going to give a percentage. Maybe you say, hey, we were doing this amount. Like we were giving $50. Let's try giving 55, whatever it is. Maybe you just bump it up. But then like for these last 2 levels, for those that want to say like, we want to just jump right in, trust God. We're going to give 10% of our income. Or maybe you're doing that and say, hey, we want to go over the top and want to give an extra percent. I want to challenge you. Fill out a connection card. Let me know. We've already had over 20 people, 20 couples sign up for this giving challenge. Just write 90-day giving challenge, put your name on it, all right? And I want to send you a gift in the mail. I actually had to order more books because we've had that many people sign up to do this, and I want to be able to send that to you, encourage you along the way. And I always say this as well. If you think that this is just a gimmick for our church to continue to just have more money and hold on to resources or whatever, I can promise you that it's not. On your way home, you pick a church, maybe it's your grandma's church, maybe it's just a random church, and you give to that church, you tithe there, you keep showing up here. If you have kids in the kids ministry, they're gonna love it. I think we got one of the best kids ministry in all of Etowah County. They're gonna grow, they're gonna have fun, they're gonna make friends. I think you need to continue to show up because you're going to grow spiritually. You're going to connect with God in ways maybe you never have before, and you're going to grow in your faith. I think your marriage may even improve, and in your own personal life, I think things you deal with are going to get better. You keep showing up here, but you can give somewhere else because this step of faith works anywhere because I'm telling you, God wants to bless you in that way. And after 90 days, you're like, Pastor, I gave with the right heart. And I did this and I did that, whatever, but man, this is a bunch of garbage. I didn't experience anything. My life got 1,000 times worse, and I can't believe you shared that with me. I'll never do that again. Hey, listen, I'm letting you know right now, after 98, you don't have to give anymore. You don't have to give anymore because it's not between me and you. That's between you and God anyways. And so that's the challenge, 90 days. When you read scripture, God says this is the one area to test him. And so I'm telling you, put God to the test and see if he won't. 90 days. And sign up, and I would love to be able to encourage you. I want you to experience what life of abundance is like, and that can only happen when you put God first in every single area of your life. Hey, let's pray together.